Good afternoon and welcome everybody to our third remote and virtual alumni webcast. Thank you for joining us. We've got 180 people signed up today. I suspect we'll probably not see 180, but following a very successful webcast that we had with Didem and Otesh on AI, diversity and ethics, what seems not that long ago, it was 10 weeks ago. We asked you what you would like to hear about next from Accenture. And one of the key topics that came forward was really what trends are we seeing in the security space. And so I'm really pleased today that we've been joined by two of our leaders from our security practice, a practice that really has grown significantly, both organically and inorganically in the last 5 years. So today we're joined by Nick Taylor and Jacky Fox. Nick has previously had a number of big roles in Accenture across strategy, digital, across a number of our geographies, and now looks after our practice in the UK for security. Jacky has 20+ years experience in security. She was security champion of the year in Ireland only 2 years ago, and also is a major contributor to the World Economic Forum on cybersecurity topics. So I'm really pleased that we've got Jacky and Nick to join us today. We're going to stick with the same format that we did last time. We have spoken to a number of you and taken some feedback, and that format is pretty much that we'll probably have half an hour, 35 minutes of presentation, and then we stop for Q&A. We're using the Teams live platform, which does bring us the advantage of being able to go to pretty big numbers. In terms of engagement, that is via the chat window for yourself. So if you have any questions, I would strongly encourage you just to put them in as soon as you think of them. If they're pertinent to the immediate point that we are taking, I will interrupt Nick and Jacky, and we'll tackle them at that point in time. If they're kind of for more wrap up, then I'll bring all the questions we have into themes together at the end. I think it's fair to say I saw the sign up list for today. We've got everybody from kind of very deep security experts to people who are interested in just finding out more about this topic. So no doubt will be too detailed for some people and not enough for others. So please just guide us with the questions today on where you want to focus and where you want to hit. Nick, Jacky, thanks for joining us. Over to you. On mute, Nick, at the moment. We've all done that.
There we go. Am I back on?
You're back on.
Good. I shared my screen and then it was put on mute. Here we go. See if this works. All right, just check that people can see my screen. Just Andrew, can you shout if you can see my screen?
Yes, all good.
Great, brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much for the intro, Andrew. You're making me feel old, having been in the firm 25 years now, and done a lot of different roles within it. The last 2 years in security, and I'm really fortunate to have Jacky with me. We've been partnering up for the last nearly a year and a half now. So and Jacky's been doing a fantastic job in terms of growing Ireland. What we're going to do today is going to go through 4 things. I'll cover the first bit, which is not your mother's security, and then Jacky will cover what boards are asking for. We're seeing the board security as a board topic more and more. Then I'll sort of go through some data, some surveys, some research that we've done. To give you an understanding of kind of how COVID has been impacting the security world, what sort of malicious actors are doing out there, and also kind of where the state of security will be going to. And then we'll leave about 15 minutes for questions. Tongue in cheek, the not your mother's security, I used your mother's security rather than your father's security because we do have an issue within security, which is a gender diversity issue. When you look at the stats, we've only got about 15% of the workforce in security is female, so we need to do a better job in terms of encouraging a diversity within our security ranks. And unfortunately, we're at 26%, I think, is the last figure that we have in terms of gender diversity for Accenture security, but it's still not good enough. So anything you can do out there with the NCSC or STEM to get the message out there, that would be great. Okay. Many of you left Accenture maybe a long time ago, maybe just recently, but in the last 2 years, security has changed dramatically within the UK. So when I came in, we were quite small. We were outside of the top 5 in the market in the UK, and so what we've done over the last couple of years is we've really invested. So we've invested both, as Andrew said, organically and inorganically. So organically, we grew up until March of this year when we did an acquisition, which is Context IS. We also acquired Symantec CSS, which is the managed service arm of Symantec, in March as well. And basically that's driven about half of our growth. So we've now had 1,000% growth over the last couple of years, and we're now more than 550 people big, which is great, and a good sense of community as well. I'll go through the org chart in a minute, see if you recognize people from your past. We were outside of the top 5, as I said, and now by sort of revenue and size, we're number 1, but we're not complacent. We really do want to actually address most of the client issues out there. We don't want to just get a name check. Sustainable growth, so we've been building fast, but we've been building smart. So we've been employing people sort of at all spectrums. I talked about this sort of the end-to-end security we deliver in Accenture, and we've been building all the different pillars of security, from our sort of strategy and risk at the front end to managed services at the back end. Context IS, I spent 2 years courting Context until Babcock decided they would let them go. So they joined us in March, and actually the cutover is when they actually joined our rank and file happened 2 weeks ago. So we've welcomed 300 people to our practice, and they are consummate experts, absolutely amazing. Penetration testers, amazing assurance, so IR, incident response, and also research. And Symantec, as I've mentioned, with a very, very strong managed security services MSS background that we're using in the market. So you can see that we've strengthened managed services at the back end, we've strengthened cyber defense at the front end, and we're also strengthening cloud security in that DevSecOps space in the middle. You can see that we are doing a lot of work with partners, ecosystem partners. Maybe in your time in Accenture, you saw us doing work with them. It's really accelerated. We tend to sort of have, I think I have a partner call every day with a different partner that we're building work with within clients. And we're doing some really exciting work obviously with Microsoft. They've got the Sentinel products that they're pushing out, and I'm seeing lots more CISOs telling me that they're much more invested in Microsoft. They think it's much more robust in terms of security. You may disagree, but I'm hearing a lot of it from my clients. Google has gone in security with their Chronicle acquisition. They've had a couple of other acquisitions as well, so we've been working quite close with them, looking at that sort of big data space. ForgeRock, we've been building some intellectual property with them, machine learning, looking at digital identity. So we've been building that into the product, and it's been a very successful partnership over the last 18 months. And then Splunk, I look after Splunk for the UK, and we've built a practice. I think we've trebled the size of the practice in the last sort of year or so. We've got about 25 people that just focus predominantly on Splunk with certification, and basically helping them into the market. And we've got some interesting sort of opportunities with them. We're also developing some interesting sort of next generation security products, which I'm very proud of. So I talked about sort of machine learning applied to digital identity. We're also looking at the closed loop PAM, privileged access management. So we've been doing a lot of work on that and building some products around it. And then finally, I've been leading something around the third party risk. So I'll talk about it later on, but many of our clients are seeing third parties and that sort of extended ecosystem as being a big risk for them. Many have thousands, if not tens of thousands of partners that they have to manage now. So we're finding that there's a lot more emphasis on managing them properly, and also the regulators are catching up in terms of wanting you to stress test your third parties. If you left Accenture more than 5 years ago, you might sort of remember that we didn't really do sort of investments. We didn't do sort of mergers and acquisitions too much. But as you can see from this chart, we've accelerated that over the last 5 years. In fact, did 3 in security just in sort of March, April time alone. So I talked a little bit about Symantec and Context. We've also got some minority investments where we look at Ripjar, Endgame. They've been fantastic sort of partners with us. We've taken minority stakes and helped them into the market. We're working very closely with the likes of sort of Tanium, Palo Alto, and ForgeRock, CyberArk, and a few others. So again, it's been an really interesting ride. In fact, in my 25 years, it's probably been the most exciting role that I've had. So I'm pretty happy at the moment. This is the great team that we've got leading security in the UK and Ireland. You probably may remember a few faces there. Sanjeev has been here for quite some time. Adam has been here quite some time. There's a few returners like Christian, who's come back, and Giovanni Cosolino has come back as well. So there's a few people you might recognise, but this is pretty much the team that we have. You can see at the bottom there our new cyber defense team from Context that's come in, and we're just working with them in terms of getting into the market. All right, how we're organized. So as ever, if you remember Accenture, you remember that we had fairly often we had operating model changes. We had one at the beginning of the year where Accenture Security went into technology. And that's actually worked out quite well because it's helped us accelerate the scaling of the work that we do with the clients, leveraging sort of the technology platforms and getting closer to some of those ecosystem partners I talked about before. When we look at how we're organized, we've got the industry verticals, so everything from communications, media and technology through to resources. So we've got those industry groups. What we did is at the beginning of the year, we transitioned what we called strategy and risk. So all those people that do the security strategy work, the operating model, the board reporting, the assessments, the threat assessments, the risk assessments, and basically anything to do with sort of the strategy and the industry specificity of security. We've moved them into the industry group within security. So they're sitting there. Also cyber regulatory is there, and operation technologies, so OT and IoT, all those sort of SCADA and all the things that you might remember in terms of the physical security on the kit within supply chains and factories and manufacturing plants, etc. So that's all sitting within the industry groups. And then across we've got the domains, cyber defense, which we've scaled significantly with the acquisition of Context IS. And that does everything you would imagine cyber defense does. It does sort of investigations, responses, it does penetration testing, it looks at advisory services, i.e. looking at maybe some NIST frameworks, ISO frameworks, and kind of figuring out where your risks are. It does some research, so reverse engineers a lot of the malware. It looks at kit from coffee machines to cars and how they get hacked. In fact, we've done a number of Context showcases where the team from Context has sort of described some of the work they've done, and there's a fascinating one which actually made me late for a meeting, which was all about hacking a POS till. So getting into the hardware, they hadn't patched it unfortunately, so it was still open. So they got into it within 3 hours, and we had a couple of days to look at it, and they managed to actually break into the operating system, and sort of he went through how that happens. They've got some fantastic resources in terms of being able to kind of get into stuff. We've got operation resiliency. Resiliency I'll talk about in a minute when we talk about COVID, and threat intelligence. So you may have seen on the chart before that we bought a company called iDefense, which have a fantastic amount of threat intelligence. We've created something called the Intel Graph, where we load all that threat intelligence onto a platform that clients could consume. So again, that's our cyber defense, and we've grown obviously that significantly with that acquisition. Cyber defense, if you were here a while back, 2 years ago, the strongest part of our sort of security practice was the digital identity practice. It's still very, very strong, and we've got a very, very, very great digital identity practice that focus on sort of customer, focus on enterprise, and also focus on PAM as well. And we've been building our cloud and infrastructure, sort of marrying cloud and DevSecOps and getting that security together, GRC platform and the rest. And we've done quite a lot of application security and application testing, built some interesting platforms around that. The managed security service. So this end-to-end, if you want to do everything from the sort of the strategy of security through to the managed services. The back end is the managed services, the old sort of outsourcing or operations as you might have known it, and that really does kind of look at things like we can manage your SOC, your security operations center, we can manage your cloud estate, we can manage your data loss prevention, we can manage your digital identity, manage your risk, whatever you decide to manage in that security space. And we're finding that a lot of clients are picking up on that because there's not many resources out there. It's a very thin market in terms of trying to find really, really talented people. So again, if you can focus your talent on something else other than the operational side of things, that's where a lot of clients have taken some cost down, rediverted it to the things they want to invest in. That's a quick canter through Not Your Mother's Security. I think I've done it hopefully in about 15 minutes, so it will give Jacky a chance to kind of go through what boards are asking for. Jacky, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Nick. I presume everyone can still see the slides okay, and I hope everyone can hear me. Maybe someone could give me a thumbs up.
Can hear you. Yeah, can hear you well.
Yep. Brilliant, great, okay. If you could just skip on to the next slide for me, Nick, that'd be great. I presume you're still driving. Thank you. Welcome everybody, and it's really nice to hear there's such a diverse group of people actually who joined us today. I think some from security and from all sorts of different parts of the business. So why should we really be concerned about what boards are thinking about these days, and why is this relevant to you? And I suppose we all at some point are in some line that's going up to the board, and there's definitely so much more interest. We've been knocking on the doors of the board for a long time saying, you know, security is important, and I think finally they really are beginning to listen to us, and they're actually getting quite involved in how security resource, be that people, be that budgets, are being allocated. So I think no matter whether you're involved in security projects, whether you're in M&A, divestments, digital transformations, buying laptops, whatever it is you're doing within your organization, security should be a perspective that you're putting over that, or a lens that you're putting over it, because the board at some stage may challenge you. Have you thought about the security implications of whatever activity that it is you're doing? And the board definitely speak a very different language than we might do kind of in the technology security world. So they tend to speak the language of risk. And sometimes translating what we see from the technology piece into a risk piece or a control piece takes a little bit of work and a little bit of getting to understand, and also to be able to actually put your case to them and say, this is what I want to do. You often have to do a translation on that, and put it up as an operational risk or a non-financial risk or whatever it is that they want to talk about. Nick, if you could skip on to the next slide for me, that would be great. And the type of questions that we would be saying to boards you should ask are the type of questions that will be probably landing on you if you're not part of a board. So one of the questions that we see coming time and time again is sometimes boards take a view of compliance when it comes to security, rather than maybe actually looking at the controls and the technology and how they have prioritized those. And a good example of that would be we'd often see audit findings coming to an organization saying, oh, you know, there's a whole load of people who've left that organization and they still have access to application X. Why is that? And you'll find that an audit finding will go through, it'll go all the way up to the board, it'll be, you know, big X against security that this didn't happen. But you'll see that actually if you're taking a security lens on that, you might say, well, do you know what? We've stopped them from coming in the front door. You know, they can't log into our organization at all. So yes, we will get round to doing that, but we've prioritized this piece. And it's a different view. It's a view of the, you know, what are we actually doing to stop bad things from happening versus are we ticking the compliance boxes? And it's really important that we try and educate the boards about that balance. And as they get educated, they're going to put that balance back onto us as well. I'm going to speak a little bit more about metrics on some of the later slides, but we are seeing boards talking a lot about, you know, the return on investment, because security people are asking for boards to invest a lot of money in putting controls in place to make the organization be able to operate securely. And they're asking us questions like, well, when we look at the risk, you know, we want to know what's the likelihood of that risk materializing? What's the impact if that did happen? And there's very much those plane fall out of the sky moments where, you know, the impact is huge when they happen, but the likelihood is quite small. So we as humans make a decision to get on planes. Well, maybe not at the moment, but we do make decisions to get on planes every day of the week and say this is a normal thing to do. But when we translate that into security terms and a language that we can speak to the board about, we might look at something like data loss prevention. How do you stop data leaking out of your organization when you don't want it to? And should you do this as a blanket? You might actually cripple the business and not allow people to work in a normal fashion if you do that everywhere. Maybe you could target that onto some of your critical assets, your data assets and the information that you're really trying to protect, and do it in a much more targeted way. So that's taking a risk lens on your business and saying, you know, we know we need to do this, but we're really only going to put tight controls on you where it really matters and where there's a huge risk to the business if something went wrong. The board are also looking at saying, like, do they have the right governance in place that's going to offer appropriate challenge at all levels? And that's where that starts going from the board down to the senior management team and down into the people on the ground every day. And typically, you know, you'll find again this language barrier sometimes happens. So the challenge isn't there. You know, the board might say, well, you know, have we applied the right risk lens to this? And the business are saying, we've got 3 vulnerabilities that are, you know, that we know about that we're trying to fix this month, and the connect isn't happening. So both levels, we've got a responsibility to educate the board about what, how to speak about security and how to get that lens on security, but they also need to learn a little bit about what we're doing as well, so that we can have that mutual discussion and that mutual challenge going on. And the last thing that we would challenge boards with is around resilience, because at the end of the day, you can put all the controls you like in place, but if something happens to your organization and you're hit with something like a ransomware attack, what you really care about is how well you can recover from that, and do you have backups in place? Do you have mechanisms to stop people stealing data out of your organization, which is quite often what we're seeing as part of ransomware attacks today. They steal all the data and then stop you accessing it, so they have access to it, but you don't anymore. So it's really important that we look at how can we recover from a situation if it happens, because it's inevitable that we're going to get some kind of attacks these days. If you could skip on to the next slide there, please, Nick. So C-level kind of who are coming in on the board, or maybe the non-executive director level, are most worried about nation states as the threat actors coming into them. And is this right? It depends on the industry they're in. And we would certainly be saying that people should be doing threat mapping and threat hunting to find out what's an actual threat to your organization to make this more applicable. So let's say you were developing maybe a vaccine at the moment, a very relevant thing that a lot of organizations are doing. So that's really key intellectual property. And you're probably going to try and put a lot of fences around that to stop people getting into it. Do you think that nation states might be after that in that particular situation? Probably yes is the answer to it. But if it was something different, it might not be a nation state who was after it. And you might be more susceptible if you were a bank or financial services to be exposed to organised crime or potentially even insider threats. So while this is what the view is, people are very worried about, they hear about these advanced persistent threats coming into them, but maybe they need to put a lens of their own industry or their own sector on that to make sure that they're focusing in on the right places. Also, we'd see people are very concerned about the impacts of breaches and data breaches. And I think in security, we have an awful lot to be thankful for the data protection officers in the world and GDPR, because it really put a lens and lifted us up out of the kind of tech rooms and the IT department into the boardroom, because people got very focused about the penalties that they could end up paying and the financial impact that it could have if they went against GDPR. So that's been really useful for us. And also it's good for us to be kind of giving some perspective about investment priorities. And so we see that investment priorities, people are looking at, will I get identity and access management right? Look at the right people, looking at the right things at the right time. And also application security, we're doing pen testing, we're looking at how we develop things and are we being secure all the way along that life cycle. But sometimes there are other priorities that are sector specific that you might need to focus on. If, for example, you've got operational technology in your network, or if you've got a vast degree of assets, or even we're seeing now, if people are working from home, it's kind of changed the perimeter a little bit and what you might want to look at within that. We're also seeing that a lot of businesses are moving out into the cloud at the moment. So even looking at the security controls that we would have had in place where people had that traditional on-premise perimeter has changed hugely, particularly in the last couple of months. And I think some organizations maybe are doing things quickly and doing a little bit of a look back. We're all working from home. Is our Wi-Fi secure at home? We might want to go back and check that. Or also, a lot of organizations who have, cloud kind of SaaS models where they're providing a version that you can run from the cloud of an application and a version that you can run on-prem. Well, they might be in sync now, but we're seeing a lot more organizations go straight to cloud with new versions of things. And it's very important that the controls are in place to actually do that securely. And we're seeing a lot of organizations say, well, actually, we're going to go to this new cloud version because it's got more in it than maybe the on-prem version did, and they're presuming that the same controls that they had are going to work again, and that's not a safe presumption at the moment. So we're definitely recommending that people should look at that sort of thing. If you could go on to the next slide, please, Nick. So a lot of the way that we're suggesting that boards and C-level and management should look at this is by use of metrics. So, but we're seeing that people are looking at kind of very targeted metrics, like the number of events that of people trying to send something inappropriate out of the organization, how many unpatched vulnerabilities have we got on our servers, or how many phishing emails did we manage to block? And clearly in something like phishing emails, you can block 10,000 of them. Yay, that's great, 99.9999% of it. But it might be the one that you didn't block that brought in ransomware and obliterated your organization. So we're seeing that, you know, kind of when we're showing this information up through management, we're talking about status, we're talking about things that, you know, yes, we may be measuring them at an operational level, but they probably don't really have that risk lens when they go up. And if you could skip on to the next slide for me, please, Nick. So good security metrics should be including things like business strategy, IT strategy, and the same metrics can be looked at with a lot of different lenses, be that operational to make you more efficient, or be that strategic where you're looking at the business level, or risk where you're looking at it from a board level. And those metrics should be clear and unambiguous, and it should be easy for people to read on a month-by-month or quarter-by-quarter basis of what they're looking at. And they also should be actionable, like based on what's happening within those metrics, you should be informing different sets of decisions. And if we could just go on to the last slide there, please, Nick. So what we would like boards to be seeing in this space is much more on a strategic level, you know, that we need to educate them so that they actually know more and can understand the metrics. We need to be looking at a strategy on the strategic level, as in, is it aligned with the business? You know, what's going on in the world around us? Have we been breached? And then that risk management piece, we're looking at, you know, the traditional security terms around confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that will help us to look at, you know, is our risk exposure going up or down? And it can change week on week, month on month, year on year. And quite often people aren't looking at these metrics frequently enough because they don't have them in that dashboard type facility so that they can actually watch what's going on. So if we've just gone to the last slide there, please, Nick. So one thing we're saying is that, you know, looking at managing security and risk through the pyramid of the business, data drives good behavior. Data is everything. We need to make sure that the story we're telling is consumable and understandable by people at all levels of business, whether they be technologists, risk practitioners, the board. They all need to be able to look at this data and make sensible decisions on it. So we need to provide good insights that the business can action. And on that note, I'm going to hand back over to you, Nick. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks, Jackie. Just a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
We've also had a few questions trickling in, but I'm going to save them for the end. So just to encourage people as well, if they have got any, just to ping them in, and we're not ignoring them. We're just saving them up for you, Nick and Jackie.
Perfect. All right, great. And
a couple of tricky ones. I'm looking forward to this, actually.
Good. I love tricky questions.
Well, I'm going to be goldfishing then, right? Where I'm trying to answer the question with my mouth moving, but no words coming out. Anyway, one of the things that's quite interesting, and Jackie sort of hinted at this, was I work a lot with CISOs, and this whole thing around reporting is quite tricky. I'm working with CISOs who are spending 2 or 3 weeks of the month just trying to collect the data to report back for a board presentation. So again, anything we can do to sort of standardize the reporting, standardize the metrics, pull data from systems to make it much more clear. And data is everything, but too much data. So I'm working with a bank who has 82 pages of metrics, which is phenomenally difficult to actually make any decisions on. So again, I think having too much data can obviously go the other way. But again, finding that balance, and we haven't had time to sort of position it today, but there are sort of 23 metrics that matter that I'm quite happy to share if people want them for the board reporting. Okay, I thought I'd go through. I've been in my tenure as looking after security. I've been really fascinated with sort of data-driven insights from security. There's quite a lot of emotion around security, as one would imagine, with breaches going on, threat actors attacking, malicious insiders leaking stuff, good people doing silly things, falling foul of phishing. So there's lots of emotion around security, and we've been sort of pushing this thing around, sort of being very data driven and insightful with that data. So I was going to take you through a bunch of sort of research and stats that we've got, and some interesting conclusions that that we're drawing from that research. And there's links to all of this. I don't know, there doesn't seem to be a link on this, but what we'll do is make sure we get the links to you, so you can click on the links and get to the research papers and do a little bit more digging. This one was from sort of nearly 5,000 executives around the world, and we had 24 industries covered and 16 countries covered. And we sort of sent out the survey to kind of figure out sort of the state of cyber resilience. You know, how are companies looking at their resiliency, proactive and reactive? And what we found was that one of the interesting things is that security budgets are growing, and what we've seen with COVID is that that's not really stopped. They may not be growing as fast, and we'll talk a bit about cost optimization in a bit, but certainly IT budgets, or the percentage of security as IT budgets has been increasing over the last few years, and it's sitting around 11% at the moment, which I found quite large in terms of, you know, because when we look at some of our clients, they've got very, very large IT budgets, but it's sitting around 11%. The hygiene is getting better, so actually the number of breaches is going down. So companies have become much more effective at stopping the attackers getting into the system. The volume of actual attacks going on has increased dramatically, probably by double, if not more. But actually the ones getting through, and these 22 breaches you're seeing here are where a threat actor has gone inside your network. So that's how we count a breach, and you can see that's reduced from 30 last year. Hidden threats. I talked a little bit about sort of third parties. That seems to be sort of coming up the risk register. I'm certainly on 2 or 3 boards I'm working with. Of their top 3 risks, third party risk is one of those 3. We're seeing, I think, the figures is about 36% of breaches are happening through third parties. And you can see that 60% of the companies that we interviewed don't have effective protection across the ecosystem. And then we've got the security costs. So 60% agree that they can't keep ahead of the attackers. The costs are dramatic. I think, you know, this is something Jacky pointed out earlier on, that sort of balance between how much do you spend to mitigate the risk. Now, if a nation state is coming after you, you know, you could spend 100 million on security and they'd still get in. So it's about sort of a balance of, you know, who do you think is attacking you? So that threat mapping to figure out who the threat actors are and how exposed you are, and then sort of how do you react. And then a lot of companies post COVID are really thinking about putting more cost into resiliency. So things that allow them to be proactive, like threat hunting, about sort of rehearsing the threat actors getting in and breaches happening, so that they're kind of much more prepared to be resilient when an attack occurs. And then we'll talk about where people are investing or where the companies are investing. But what we're seeing is a lot more sort of customer records disappearing out of the organisation. So you can see 44% of the organisations we interviewed had more than 500,000 records exposed. Okay. We've been, this is available, there's a link there. So we've been publishing some threat intelligence on COVID, and what I've guided the team to do is to be quite judicious about the sort of the emotion around it. I think a lot of our clients have reacted positively when we've gone in with you know, there are some risks, but you know, it's not like you're going to get breached tomorrow just because of COVID, right? We sort of put the severity at medium, and a lot of our customers have kind of come back and said, well, actually you're kind of much more balanced than we've seen out there. We also offer some indicators of compromise. So there's a list of kind of domains. I think we registered something like 6,000 domains have been set up just in the last month that are sort of using COVID as a way of getting into an organisation. So along with this analysis, there is also indicators of compromise that you can feed into your SIEM, into your security information and events management system. So again, if you want that, but basically the sort of the thing we're finding from that threat intelligence is sort of fourfold. We're finding that there's a lot of government-backed campaigns, a lot of social media being used to kind of incite, you know, sort of. I think we saw the attacks on 5G networks. We've seen spoofed WHO, World Health Organization domains. We also see ransomware, and we've seen ransomware hit a lot of medical institutions, especially Maze. There was a kind of I think, a moratorium on May's hackers actually going after medical information from, I think, the 14th of March. So I think they've calmed that down now, but we saw a lot of it sort of late Feb, early March. PI and theft, so we're seeing a lot more campaigns around trying to get data from the organisation. We've got a few examples of that. I won't cover them now because we're about sort of 6 minutes before we need to get to Q&A. And we've seen information gathering campaigns through COVID as well. So we've seen sort of websites being set up to register sort of COVID sort of vaccines and COVID tests, and then using that as a way of gathering information. And you can see that we're finding about the cost on average is about 2.5 million per instance of a breach within UK-based companies. And obviously that dramatically, you know, that's an average. You know, you could be spending sort of 50 to 100 million with a big breach. For those that sort of are trying to kind of maybe are not in this world or not in the security world, and often with boards, I kind of guide them to this side. The information is beautiful. The world's biggest data breaches. All those bubbles are breaches above 30,000 records. And I think a couple of things you can see is, one, the volume from 2012 up to 2020. You can see sort of a growing volume. The bubbles are getting bigger, i.e. there's bigger breaches that are going through. Obviously, there's more information out there. Obviously, companies are becoming much more digital, so it's to be expected in some respect. But interestingly, it sort of shows you kind of how they've been breached and what they've lost. And the orange ones are interesting sort of case studies, so you can sort of click on that and see sort of what companies are being attacked and what they're losing. Also, the ICO, Information Commissioner's Office, is a great place to go and look at sort of companies that have been fined, just to see kind of the wave of companies and what they're doing. So if you want to see threats and where they're coming from, then that's a good site. We're seeing sort of the pandemic being used, you know, sort of playing on fears and desires. So, you know, there's some terrible behaviours out there. Anyway, I think we've all read about them in the paper. But again, phishing attacks are on the rise. So if there's anything you're involved with in terms of security posture, then sort of making sure that your people are your first line of defence by kind of educating them more. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Then the home working. So Jacky talked about this earlier. So what we've seen is, you know, there's been a rush to get people to work from home. So again, so the resiliency thing comes into play here. We've got an example where we moved 1.2 million health workers to Microsoft Teams in less than a week, and again that rush, but also making sure that security has been sort of properly thought about in the interim. And again, I would sort of suggest that the home networks are much more porous than enterprise networks. So again, training your employees, making sure they're the first line of defence. And this is actually the advice for home working that's in the threat intelligence that we released from iDefence for COVID. So it's in that pack, should you want it, but it'll be in this as well. Okay. Interestingly, how security is changing, where the investments are sort of being made. So I mean, obviously, security is more of an arms race, right? Everybody's, you know, sort of the attackers find a way, and then the companies find a way to stop them. So it's always in a state of change. It's interesting that we found, you know, a majority, so 88% of companies are spending more than 20% of their security budget on advanced technologies. So those are things like, you know, artificial intelligence, next generation firewalls, privileged access management, risk-based authentication. Also user behavior analytics, which isn't on there, but I'm seeing that sort of pop up quite a bit in terms of, you know, understanding if there's anomalies between the way that your people are acting in the organization, and whether they are people or whether they're sort of automated devices and bots that are on your systems. So we're finding a lot more of that advanced technology is being used, and the other driver for that is not only because it's there and it's efficient, is also, as I pointed out earlier on, the actual kind of resources that are in the marketplace are scant at the moment. So using those technologies to enable you to actually kind of you know, position your people, you know, onto more effective and profitable work. There's a forum that, should you wish to get involved in, if you are a CISO or if you're a security executive and want to get involved, we run something called the Accenture Cybersecurity Forum. They sort of meet monthly. I think we've done it every couple of weeks during COVID. It's probably about 300 or 400 CISOs we have around the globe. You can see that, that there's some interesting topics they cover. It's not an Accenture selling thing. It's clients talking about their problems and sharing sort of intelligence and sharing sort of points of view. So ransomware, cloud, audit, impact on cyber ops, addressing breach, so the reaction. We've got a ACF Women's Council that's in there as well, so they have some topics occasionally. So resilience, security, leadership, you can see there, and pivot to cloud. So if you do want to join that, then please let me know, or click on the button there. I think there's a way to get in there. Again, Andrew told me that this wasn't a selling sort of platform. Repeatedly, but I get a lot of requests from my alumni colleagues to saying, we really love that Hackerland series you did, and we want to sort of do it in our companies. Can you give it to us? And we've always said for the last 3 or 4 years that they've asked me, and we've always said no, we can't, we don't have it. But fortunately, we've now kind of genericized it. So all that Hackerland and interactive training is now available should you wish, and we're sort of doing it at almost like a cost price, because again, it's just good to get this stuff out there and get people trained. So and then in Accenture's metrics, we've kind of trained 350,000 of our people. Interestingly, we've measured the secure behaviors. So obviously we do the phishing simulations, and we kind of and we sort of look at sort of who's clicked on the links, and our behaviors have improved by 86%. So you can actually measure it, and then we've got 66% fewer failures on social engineering tests. So again, should you wish to have access to that training that you loved when you were here, then it's available for you. I think we managed to do it with 1 minute to spare, Andrew.
I'm amazed, Nick. I'm amazed. We've got
Jacky and I can talk so quickly, right?
Well, I know.
Well, I can anyway.
I think I told you guys it was my 20th year and 364th day with Accenture today, and every year I've been told speak slower. So you guys have possibly out-trumped me there. We've got a set of questions, some of them published, some of them not, some of them around some general themes, some of them more pretty specific actually. So Nick, you mentioned diversity at the beginning, and you said it's not good enough. I'd like to have you both, and I'll start with Jacky. What is the barrier, and what are we doing about having a much more diverse workforce within the security practice?
Great question. I think a lot of it stems back to people's educational backgrounds and what their perception of what they need to hold from a qualification perspective to get into security. So yes, we do have a lot of people who come from a STEM background in security, but there's also a lot of space for people who come from legal, regulatory, compliance backgrounds, all sorts of different things. And my view at the end of the day is that I would prefer to take somebody who is really smart and who can bat off an attacker by pitting their wits against them than somebody who's had years of security training, because a lot of it comes down to being able to put your foot down onto the floor and make things happen when you need to, about dealing with problems, because that's at the end of the day what we do in security. We take problems with attackers, we learn how to deal with them, and we bat them off, and we put controls in place. So I think people get just put off, in the beginning. And I think that there probably is a lack of role models as well, for people to look at to say, kind of there's somebody who looks like me, who has navigated through this career path and is making a success of it. So I think we need to make sure that we've got a diverse set of role models up at the top and through the various levels. Now, I think we are doing a good job at our junior levels, in bringing in a diverse set of people. I think we could be doing a better job at a senior level, but we are trying to make a difference with that. So that'll be my perspective on it.
Very good. Nick, anything you want to add to that one?
No, I think well, yes, I think I will. So I think giving people a chance, right? So we've seen I've got a great example. One of our recruiting leads, she was in recruiting, had no security background at all, just fell in love with security as she was recruiting for us, and we put her we sort of gave her some training for 3 or 4 months, and she's absolutely flying. She goes to client interviews now and just sails through in terms of, you know, her skills, and because the passion is there. And I think finding those people, you know, from all different diversity backgrounds, finding those people with the passion, and then, you know, just helping them along their way, right? It would have been easy to say, well, you haven't got any security experience, so no, I'm afraid not. But she's actually proved us wrong. It's been a joy to see.
Excellent.
Yeah, the best, I don't know whether anyone can hear me or not.
Yeah.
The best security person I ever took into practice to work with me and trained, best forensic analyst, it's probably the deepest, most technical piece of work that you can do, was an English major. So
there's hope for us all. I mean, Nick did rocket science, I did aeronautical engineering. I think you're the only professional, you know, educated, Jacky. So a few more questions coming through. I wanted, what role is AI, right? And Nick, you know the clients I work at, right? And I need to be very careful about talking about them because we deal with some of their sensitive issues. But I guess I get a mixed view from my clients about the role of AI, right? In that it needs huge pattern libraries and data sets to recognize attacks, and that's useful on a kind of a, you know, an enterprise infrastructure where we've been able to train over a period, but it's less useful for kind of some of the newer techniques. I'd like to just ask you both, what role is AI playing, and what investment are we making in that space?
So from my point of view, what I feel, you know, being new to security, one of the things that struck me is the vast amount of data that you have to go through in the security space. So logs through the wazoo, right? Hundreds of connections, thousands of third parties, the amount of data that you have to sort of look through. And AI, and more machine learning at the moment rather than AI, is playing an important part in terms of being able to kind of spot those anomalies, right? And get rid of the false positives. Because you know, the security people that I deal with tear their hair out when you've got so many false positives coming through. You investigate, everyone takes time. You know, I was working with a company, you know, just to investigate 1,500 third parties, you spend an hour on each, and you're going to need a team of 10 for a year to do it, right? Mm. So if you can use things, and you know, people will react to this. You know, there's lots of security scoring. So scoring companies out there like BitSight and GRX and a few others, but taking sort of, you know, feeds from them and being able to kind of focus where you'll prioritize your investigations is kind of key at the moment. And having machine learning and AI to help you do that is, I think, is key. And it's only getting better, right? We're at the start of the journey, so it's all a bit sort of nascent at the moment. But we're starting to see companies investing in it. We're working with Google, with AWS, we're working with ForgeRock, CyberArk. They're all militantly focused on this machine learning to AI and helping that journey. Jacky, I can see you're chomping at the bit to get in there as well.
Jacky's taking notes there. I mean,
yeah, for me, I think there has to be the huge distinction between automation and artificial intelligence, because I think an awful lot of people are kind of going, we've got the greatest and latest AI product, and actually it's an automating product. So I think that we have a huge shortage of people in the security industry, and where we can take a job and automate it, or, you know, even pulling bits of information to feed to somebody who's making analysis in an automated way, it's a win-win for everybody. People end up we're applying the humans to the things that really need a human brain to approach them. I do think there's some very early signs of AI beginning to make a difference, where, you know, basically pieces of information are put together and brought into something new without a human actually in that loop. So certainly around kind of spotting malware, spotting kind of unusual behavior that's enough of a pattern to flag. There's a little bit of that happening, but it's very limited through AI kind of at this space in cybersecurity. There's a lot of mislabeling, I think, but there's some little nuggets of it. And I think over time, we really will need the application of AI in security, because the attacks are going to be AI based. So we need to have the responses AI based as well.
Okay, fascinating. We've got two other questions. They're quite specific. One, I'm just going to read out because I'd like the question just to be a bit more specific, which is from a former national security professional Accenture partner. I think I know who this is, but I'm not going to say, because I think we had a conversation about the alumni event. earlier this year. But his question, and if I could ask that, the person who asked the question says very little mention of people aspects of cybersecurity seen as a priority by HMG, Her Majesty's Government. Why? If you could just slightly clarify that question, that'd be great, because I'm going to flip back to the other question quickly, which is from David Noyce. But David's asking, hi guys, any thoughts on particular security challenges for an early stage fintech? The fin is in brackets, so I assume it's kind of technology led, all budget constrained and not the typical Accenture client, but growing part of a partner and third party ecosystem. What considerations would you put into David's minds? Jacky, I'm going to go with you on that one.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, the first thing I would say is please make sure that you're embedding security all the way through your process. Don't allow, that balance where you're saying, functionality versus security. Security said no, functionality is fantastic, but at the end of the day, you can have all the functionality in the world, but one breach could bring you right down and destroy your reputation. So please make sure that you've got the focus on security all the way through the life cycle. It is cheaper and more efficient to build it in at the left-hand side of the life cycle than it is trying to bolt it on afterwards. So that would be my one singular piece of advice. Like fintech, it's all about, innovation and those things, and just don't lose security along the way. Boring and all as it can be at times, it's very important. And I suppose regulatory as well, the regulatory implications and some of the security things, again, you need to be on the front foot with those too.
I think there's a fact, I think I might be misquoting it, so I'll take a punt at it anyway from memory. I think it was from NIST, and they sort of said investing in security by design, $1 there saves you $38. Having to retrospectively sort of put security in afterwards. So it's false economy to kind of wing it and hope for the best. It's best to put it in by design. And and again, I know this is a stretch because funding is very tight with the fintechs, and every dollar counts. But I would guide them to kind of invest in security, and if they can't, then have a good, safe operating environment that doesn't expose the company you're dealing with until you've kind of tested it and you've got the ability to weave that security back into it. Okay,
and then just go back to the question. The question hasn't clarified, but the very little mention of people aspects of cybersecurity seen as a priority by Her Majesty's Government. I guess, I know from what we do internally around testing, even myself, about do I recognise a phishing attack from a normal email. How are we looking at the kind of people aspects of some of the challenges around cybersecurity? Jacky, do you want to start on that one, and then Nick?
Yeah, sure. I think we should never underestimate the amount of training that people need to receive, no matter whether you're a security professional or whether you're a user or whether you're someone sitting at home as a citizen or what your role is. And for me, a lot of that is about making it real, making it short and sharp and impactful, rather than these kind of year-long kind of compliance-based style training. So I think it's very important to keep it front and center in people's minds all the time. And I think it's very important also that when things happen to organizations, that they're open about it and that their lessons learned are brought out into the open and discussed so that other organizations can benefit from the learnings from those.
From me, the NCSC is doing a pretty good job in terms of looking at people. So they're we're working quite closely with them, and they're looking at people, and also they're doing a great job in terms of bringing people up from school and into the cybersecurity. So it's not only sort of that sort of making people the first line of defense, it's also kind of introducing people to the market. I think for me is you have to make it sort of interesting and engaging. Otherwise, people just won't consume it. So I had a client that put it on VR. So they did all their security training through virtual reality, and had mock-up of the office, and at lunchtime people just put on the goggles and walked around the office and kind of spotted security issues, right? Much like we do with our interactive training at Accenture. But I think making it consumable. I think also people who have been breached, if you've been sort of through that, you are much more savvy to security as an individual. So clients have had massive breaches. All the people there are much more engaged with security, sort of measures. So I think give people the chance to experience the emotion of being breached without without being breached. So, you know, the phishing mails, although they're kind of if you feel the pain, right? If you feel like somebody's trodden around your email account and taken your laptop on ransomware, you can bet your bottom dollar that they will be much more security savvy, you know, through the rest of their life. So how do you give that to people, that feeling, that emotion, before they actually kind of are subject to it?
Interesting. So we have one more question coming in, and then I'm going to wrap us with a final question. But Vikram's asking, I'm slightly interpreting this question, so Vikram, if I've got it wrong, I apologise. But when we look at kind of transitioning or creating a managed service type of offering to a client, and Nick, you know very well, I've done that on a couple of my clients with your team. How much transformation work goes in up front? And could we talk about that very briefly? And then it needs to be a 30-second answer because we're coming to the end, and then I've got my final question for you both.
All right, that's a really hard one because obviously, you know, it's the standard consulting answer, isn't it? It depends, right? I think if you're, you know, I'm dealing with a company at the moment who don't have the luxury of doing any transformation, right? They're hemorrhaging, right? So they're being attacked every day. They've had 2 breaches. All they want is a security wrapper around their service. So I think if you're in trouble, very little transformation has to happen before you can put a wrap around it. If you've got the luxury of time, then I'd combine it with, you know, something else you're doing like journey to cloud and DevSecOps. Combine those journeys with the security layer as well, so you're getting, you know, sort of transformation happening throughout rather than just trying to layer in security, which is more patching than anything else.
And I'd add in, it depends a lot on your risk appetite as well, because if you're highly regulated or if you have a very low risk appetite in your organization, you really need to do a lift and shift and make sure that you're operating to the exact standards that you were before you start looking at transforming, unless you know you've got some big exposure that you probably should try and address as part of the transformation.
Okay. And we're going to run a questions at the end. We're going to have to come back to you on email, but we always answer the questions. I'm going to finish with mine as I'm allowed to. And so I subscribe to Tim Ferriss's emails. Every week he sends me 5 things to listen to or to read or do. In the security space, what would be the one thing you would subscribe to or go and read if you wanted to get more into it and you weren't in the kind of core security role? Jacky, what would you say? And we've not prepped this, so.
There's a great podcast that I love listening to. It's about 2 hours long every week, and it's called Security Now. And I listen to it pretty much every week. And in fact, I thought it was so good that I went right back to when it started about 10 years ago, and I've listened to all the prior episodes, and I learned loads from this guy. Steve Gibson is his name. So a really interesting guy. He's great guests on the show, but it might be a bit deep for someone who's not techie. So
let's put the link on. Haley does a really good write-up of this. Let's put the link on the follow-up. Nick?
There's a book. I went through Audibles. I listened to maybe 30 books as part of my journey into security. Cybersecurity Handbook. I'll put it on the link so that you can have a look at it. It's basically a story taking through a C-levels, sort of a CEO, and taking them through the journey of all their security sort of questions they got asked, the breach and how it happened. And it's a good read as well as kind of being very informative.
Brilliant.
Can I add 2 things? Cuckoo's Egg and Sandworm, brilliant books.
Let's get them on the list as well. I know we didn't hit everybody's questions. It was kind of a flurry at the end there, which is great. We'll get written answers to them. Nick and Jacky, thank you for taking the time. Thank you to everyone that joined today. We are continuing to seek your feedback on the topics important, what you thought of today's format and on the approach. And also to Haley, thank you for organising, and we look forward to seeing you all again in another quarter.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.